an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Holy Sister, chapters 10, 11, 12, and 13. In these chapters, we get a heist to try and steal a book. And honestly, this is very tense, and I was agitated the whole time. And I'm still not entirely sure that we got away with it. I guess we'll see. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Martin for commissioning this episode. Martin is here in the chat with me. What's up? Martin, help me out real quick. It's been 2 weeks since my last recording period. I don't remember how long since my last Holy Sister recording. I feel like it was the same week, and so it hasn't been that long. But I am trying to remember if we know what this book is supposed to do for us. And I don't feel like we've been told. I don't think Nona knows, and that she was just kind of given the instruction without a whole lot of information by Abbess Glass. But I am not positive of that information, and I didn't have time to go back and, flip through things and find out. I didn't want to look anything up because of spoilers, obviously. And I just wanted to be sure that there wasn't something very specific on the line regarding the book that I should remember and know about, because the impression that I have as of right now is that the book is something that we know is going to be, because of Abbess Glass, always thinking several steps ahead. And because of how closely guarded a lot of her information was, she told Nona for a very specific reason that she should go and find it, but that she didn't confide exactly why, and that it probably won't even be obvious once we get the book exactly what she meant, that there's going to maybe be a little bit of digging regarding that. But Martin says supposed to help them get into the Ark and control the moon. Oh, right. Okay, I remember now. Thank you. That's the problem with doing this sometimes, because there's so much going on in this series. It's kind of funny, actually, because there's not a ton going on in terms of, we don't get a bunch of different POVs, really. We tend to be mostly in Nona's POV. We got Abbess Glass occasionally, and we've had the departure here and there. So it's not like that is necessarily what I mean when I say that there's a lot going on, but I think that because so much is included in terms of what I guess you could call off-plot character stuff that isn't necessarily entirely relevant to the main thrust of what we're trying to accomplish in this little mission here or previous, that sometimes I will focus on things that aren't going to wind up being that terribly important because I was just interested and fascinated by them. And the whole idea of controlling the moon is so alien to me. And I think that I have a bit of a disconnect in terms of the feeling of urgency I have regarding getting control of the Ark in this way. I was thinking about that in regard to, there's a scene in which I think it's Ruli takes Nona up and shows her how close the advancing army is, to really impress upon her how bad the situation is. Because when Nona tells her we're going to go and steal the book today, she expects some pushback and does not get it, and is really surprised by that. And the moment that Nona sees the advancing army and realizes how tight things are, I have to confess, I didn't feel it. I don't have the sense of urgency at the approaching army that I feel like maybe I should have. And I don't know if that's a result of reading the book in the way that I am, really spaced out, focusing on sort of pulling things apart and talking in depth about it. I feel like maybe part of the reason is because it wasn't on my radar as a threat until the very end of the last book, when we get told that this is something that, you know, not only do we need to worry about, but that, what's her name? The woman who Abbas Glass went up against, that she had like this whole dastardly plan with figuring out how to basically turn traitor in her way. I think that I'm a little bit too close to some of the plot and the characters. And so for me, I'm much, much more interested in making sure that fucking Joelle gets hers. And I will be more, if there was like a chapter that I had to choose between reading about Nona finally like getting one over on Joelle or Nona managing to control the moon, I would read the Joelle chapter first. That's the one that I really am interested in. And I think that if I felt a little bit closer to the situation regarding the war, if maybe there was a POV from the front lines, it really hammering home to me what it's like out there. The only thing that we've gotten really is that one glimpse through Kettle's eyes when, you know, because her and Nona are connected with thread work, we see this like slaughter that is left behind, you know, of this like entire village. And Nona realizes that it was a village that she had gone to. White Spire, something, Whitehaven, trying to remember the name of it. But that's really it. And because we've spent so little time anywhere but the Abbey, I am not as invested in it's sort of like in Harry Potter where you're just at Hogwarts so much that when you read about things that are happening like out in Hogsmeade or something, it doesn't feel the same way as somebody turning up dead in like the potions dungeon or something. I don't feel the connection. And I feel a little bit bad about that because sometimes I think that's my failing as a reader, that I get much more attached to little character stuff because it's more fun and a little bit more petty, to be honest, which is sometimes what I'm here for. I won't lie. And the overarching like movements of politics and troops. This is something that I ran into when I was reading the Witcher series as well. And eventually Melanie, who had been commissioning that, sort of pulled back and started commissioning something else because I think she could see I was just having a lot of trouble really connecting when we're reading about the Witcher taking down a monster. That's one thing. But then we would get into these prolonged political talks and meetings with names that didn't really mean a lot to me or meant a little something, but not enough. And I just couldn't follow it because I didn't care enough to try to follow it. So in as much as we're about to do a heist and break into a place that we're not supposed to go, twice, really, because there's also Nona trying to break into the storage room for all of the poisons. It's a small, succinct idea. We're trying to break into this thing and steal this thing and not get caught. 100% behind it. But when we're looking at the larger, I completely forgot about controlling the moon. That was something that had been told to us, and I just straight up forgot it. So that's an indication of how that apparently didn't really mean a lot to me or matter to me very much. Martin says, yeah, that's kind of how it happens. You sort of know it's a thing, but it mainly starts up off screen and you only see how serious it is at this point. Yeah, I think that's part of why I really do like multi-POV stories, because if you're trying to do something on this level, that just sort of helps. And it wouldn't even necessarily have to be a recurring POV. You could have like here and there occasionally a person who maybe Game of Thrones style, you see from their POV for like a chapter and then they're killed. And then Nona, and then another chapter from somebody else's POV somewhere else where there's a battle going on and then they're killed. And they're sort of punctuating the overall story so that while you're with Nona and you are still invested in what's going on with her, you have these periodic reminders that there is a larger battle going on that's having an effect on real people and is really upsetting. I think the thing with Kettle, the reason that it didn't sink in with me is because she came in on the aftermath and was, I mean, we see this like creature that's got these tentacles when we're in Kettle's POV. This is a really like awesome monster that's just appearing. We had no idea even existed until this point. It's an awkward thing to drop in this late in the game and then bounce away from it and do nothing with it for chapters and chapters and never hear about it again. Nobody, like, I don't remember this being mentioned. Maybe it was, and I just didn't recognize the name of the creature, but it makes it, again, with there being like a monster instead of there being an army and a battle, it makes it feel small again. It makes the conflict feel much more personal instead of involving like, you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And it makes what Kettle is seeing feel much more theoretical. And I don't get the like firsthand horror of a regular person who's being thrown into battle. I'm seeing what amounts to basically a witch battle a shadow monster. And that doesn't feel personal enough for the war at large to really get me worried. You know, it just feels more like, well, if Kettle can beat this monster, then it will be fine in this sort of like larger way. And it won't, but it feels that way because I know her and she has this very specific bonkers threat that she's up against in this scene. So I do kind of wish that there had been a little bit more poured into that aspect of the story. Even if when we were like, from Abbess Glass's perspective, if she had shared a little bit more with us as readers, even I understand that she keeps things very close to the vest, close to the chest. I think you can say either. I understand that with like other characters, but I would have liked if maybe we could have seen some of what she knew about what was going on. In any case, I just wanted to share that because I really feel like I've been able to get away with sort of ignoring the war so far this book, and the whole scene with Nona and Zol, like, I say scene, it's really the other half of the book because we have 3 years ago and then we have the present. The whole section that's 3 years ago with her and Zoli, like, running and trying to escape with the ship heart, that also feels incredibly personal. It's just the two of them. Yeah, there's like an army after them, but that doesn't feel like the war. That just feels like power trying to smack down the little guy as usual. Martin says, yeah, maybe if at the end of last book or start of this one, you see Shirzal, thank you, I could not remember her name, and the Battle Queen's agreement falling apart and the war starting so you know it's kicking off. God, the Battle Queen's POV, that would be pretty dope, actually. I would like that. I think that occasionally, what would work for me, and I hate to like constantly reference Game of Thrones because I know it's so basic, but what George R. R. Martin does is have a prologue that will show us what's going on with the White Walkers at the beginning of most of the books. And it just sort of serves as a sort of reminder that, oh yeah, we know that there's all of these, like, intrigues and scandals going on a smaller scale. But reminder, there's this massive fucking threat that's slowly making its way closer and closer, and nobody is aware of it. Maybe starting each book with a prologue that had to do with what's going on in the larger sense, to let us know that this was something to worry about, would help. I don't want to be feeling this way at this point in the story. We're what? It looks like about a quarter of the way into this book, and it's the last book in the series. I feel like by now I should be fully on board with the larger war storyline. I feel like it's time. That's not to say that if I get on board a little bit later, it won't work for me at all. I'm just, Martin says, this book is quite short, only 350 pages compared to the first book being 500. Those extra pages could be put to good use. Oh, yeah. I didn't realize this one was so much shorter. So, yeah, that makes me a little bit concerned, to be honest. If it's so much shorter and I'm not feeling it, and I'm a quarter of the way in, there's not a lot of time left to, like, accomplish that. And it's the sort of thing that I feel like a bit, because I know that the author listens to this show occasionally, and I don't pull punches. I'm not going to not say shit just because I know that somebody who's written is listening. But I will say that as much as I am not invested in the overall war that's happening, I feel like it speaks highly of the way he draws characters that I am so invested in making sure that Joelle gets her fucking face smashed in. Like, obviously, he is very good at what he does in drawing specific people, which I think is really what writing's about. Like, anybody can be like, oh, and then the troops filed out to such and such, and then there was a battle at so-and-so mountain. But it takes a certain kind of writer to get you to really be somebody who cares about people that... I mean, finding out that Abbess Glass died was, like, devastating. I really, really liked her. So what I'm saying is, I think that it would speak to Mark Lawrence's strengths to do POVs from the front lines with characters that we got to know a little bit better, because that seems to be where his strength as a writer really lies, is creating full characters who are really well drawn and interesting that we get invested in. Anyway, I just wanted to address that out of the gate, because I really noticed that in this section, things were ramping up in that regard. And I felt like it should be ramping up for me as I read, and it wasn't really happening. Okay, so chapter 10. Nona is recovering from the wounds of taking that test and getting cut in the leg by those wires and losing a whole lot of blood. Ruli is trying to keep her in bed recovering, because Nona really, like, that, losing blood, you can die from that. Like, that was a bad injury. Nona is not here for rest. As we know, she never has been. But if she's fully dressed under her blankets, as she, like, which Ruli doesn't see until a little bit later, like, she is 100% ready to get out of here. However, it's kind of funny because she, like, forces her way out, but then once she's, like, past the doorway where Ruli can't see her anymore, she sort of sags a little because she realizes that she's actually in worse shape than she thought. Which is a very relatable thing. I think a lot of us have had moments where we've gotten sick and we are impatient with just being in bed, and we think we're going to be all right, and we get up to do something like just go pee, and we get winded and exhausted from just walking to the bathroom, and we have to, like, put our tail between our legs and go back to bed and just be like, all right, fine, I guess I'm really fucking tired. My bad. And Ruli is trying to distract Nona, saying, Kettle's home, they say she assassinated 3 Dern war chiefs. I heard she went aboard a battle barge to get the last one, killed him out at sea. I hope it hurt. The Derns had killed 2 of Ruli's uncles and sunk a good number of her father's fishing boats. She'd had no news of her family for months, which, that's one of the things that I really think about a lot in terms of how far we've come with technology and communication. Even now, you can lose touch with people so completely despite all of the tools that we have. But there was a time where you were just completely at the mercy of random messengers or, being able to travel and see people. And you just really didn't know what was going on with anybody if you didn't have a means of sending a letter or something. And during times like this, I imagine that's just incredibly dangerous. I think that's actually mentioned later on that some of maybe the messenger pigeons, it's one of the birds that they use to send messages, have been being targeted. And so sending them has been really difficult. So she says, Nona says, if Kettle is back, that makes it the perfect time to get what I need from Apple's stores. I've been wanting Kettle back. Abbas Wheel had been sending Kettle away at every opportunity, and war on 2 fronts provided plenty of opportunities. The fact was, though, that she would have sent her on nearly as many missions during peacetime. The old woman had never approved of Apple and Kettle's relationship, but even as abbess, she couldn't forbid it. The church rules on celibacy within the sisterhood concerned only relations that might add branches of the tree to the ancestor. Denial of such opportunity was considered a sufficient marriage sacrifice for the brides of the ancestor to make. I really enjoy that this is specified here because I wasn't sure if it was completely against the rules and if they were just, if it was just sort of an open secret that was they've never actually been caught. If they were caught, they would get in trouble and everybody knows about it, but they've never been spotted together. But it turns out, no, there's just not really much that Wheel can even do about it, which I like a lot better because that means that she has to just sit there and seethe privately and has no power to actually split the 2 of them apart beyond sending Kettle on all of these missions, which she's obviously doing just to be a petty bitch. And what we find out here is that since Kettle's back, her and Apple are fucking like rabbits. And they are totally distracted. Everybody talks about how loud they are. And when Nona winds up actually going down there to try and break into the storeroom, it's indeed true. I thought it was a joke, but she can hear them all the way down the hall. And at one point is actually like, God, me and my man don't make that kind of noise. Are we doing it wrong? Geez. And she has that thread bond with Kettle, which they've managed to sort of figure out a way to control it and pull back so that they're not constantly in each other's heads. But the closer that she gets when she's trying to break in, the stronger the connection is becoming. And she has to really concentrate to pull out of it. And she is feeling the arousal and is sort of just oh my God, I really need to focus because I'm about to just bust out of here and run off. And I don't even know if I'm going to make it. She says, I don't know if I'll make it past Ara's room. And I was like, then don't, girl. Go ahead to Ara. Honestly, I feel like I'm in this phase of my life that if I were bisexual, I just wouldn't be messing around with men at all anymore because it's not worth it. Men just kind of suck and don't bring a whole lot to the table and are usually just disappointing. So if you have the option to go and be with a woman, do that. Always, definitely, I would do that. Unfortunately, I'm heterosexual. And so, I do what I do. I do the best I can. But if I had the option, I would really try and go to Ara instead. So Nona, that is what I recommend. So yeah, Nona's she has left Ruli in charge of like covering up the fact that she's gone, putting some stuff under the blankets to make it look like she's still there. And we find out that there are some new sigil locks that had been put on the storeroom due to the fact that she broke in once already. They didn't know for sure who had done it, but then she turned up with black eyes because of that cure that she drank, and it was obvious it had been her. But she had also saved Kettle's life. So Apple basically was like, all right, I'm going to look the other way. I'm going to put locks on the doors, but I'm not going to get you personally in trouble. So she got lucky one time, and she knows that if she is to get caught again, she's going to get in real fucking trouble. So this is risky for her. Martin says, I kind of love that. It's such a normal, insecure teenager moment of, oh shit, I am doing it wrong. Yeah, I mean, and she is right to feel that way. Because like, when I was a teen, I was having a great time. I was not a drinker. I didn't do drugs. My vice was sex. I was so horny. I wanted to fuck all the time. And I had a steady boyfriend, and it was ridiculous. We could not be around each other without immediately wanting to fuck. And yet, in later years, despite having sex so much, really found out how much I was like getting wrong or missing or just sort of like, not aware of. And that's just shit that comes with time. And also another reason to recommend her going and being with Ara, because being with another woman will teach you about your own body. If you are a woman, it will help with that, So I think that's another advantage. But, so it takes a while for her to get down there. I won't get into like all of the ins and outs of her, traveling to this spot. But, she has to do something to break the lock that leaves a bit of a groove in the stone, which is kind of a giveaway as to it being her. I'm trying to find. Yeah, here it is. Okay. Slowly the bedrock began to flow. Within a minute, a groove had formed, allowing the door catch space to move as Nona opened the door. The lock remained locked. I thought that was kind of cool, actually. I liked that. So she goes in there, and what she's after here, which I don't think I even mentioned, is the eye drops that kept her black eyes from showing. It made her look like she had normal eyes for a minute. And we saw a few chapters ago how she is very self-conscious about that, especially because now she's involved with, what is his name? I keep wanting to say Regin, but that's a different book I think that I'm covering. Regal. Ah, I was so close. Okay. She admits to herself later on in this section, she didn't even really need the eye drops. She was telling herself she needed them because she wanted them for vanity, really. What she claims is that her black eyes are such a giveaway that there's no way for them to pull off a heist and not be recognized, if not in the moment, or then pinpointed later at least, because somebody sees her extremely distinctive eyes. But what it really is that she wants to look normal when she's with Regal, despite the fact that he claims he doesn't mind the black eyes, that he rather likes them. She doesn't really believe that. And it's the kind of thing that I want to believe him. I don't know if I do, but either way, I understand what it's like to be different in the way that you look, and however much somebody tries to assure you, that difference is something that they like about you, you can't ever really get over feeling like they're just saying that, and I say that as somebody with a relative, like, minor, but growing up in a very, very white community and being Hispanic with a very curvy figure an ass, curly hair. I did not look like what at the time was the standard of beauty in the 90s and early 2000s, which was no hips, straight hair, preferably blonde, and a kind of like almost a boyish look was distinctly not what I looked like. And I look back now and I was stunning. I had like a body like Salma Hayek and this mane of curly hair. But at the time, I really was so self-conscious about how I looked, the fact that my body didn't fit into the clothes other people were wearing, that my hair didn't do what other people's hair did, and I couldn't wear it the way they wore it. And I was with the same boy for most of high school, and even though he was obviously very attracted to me, there were occasional like comments that he made when I would like straighten my hair about how he sort of liked it better. And when I would wear it curly, it wasn't like he said anything shitty about it, but it was just enough to make me feel like, oh, you prefer when I put forth an effort to not look like myself. And it really got into my head, and it took a long time for me to kind of get over feeling like I had to do that in order to be attractive. And so I really feel for Nona in her lying to herself here and telling herself, oh, I need it for the mission, when really she wants it so that she can look the way that she thinks makes somebody else happy. That's something that you start to get over as you're older, but at her age, with the first boy that she's ever been with, it's so understandable to have that kind of hang up. And I like that it's included in the story because it's not particularly important to anything. It's just a very little character thing that feels so human. And so she takes such a risk here for it and manages to deceive herself as to what her motivations even are in getting this thing. And that just feels very real to me, you know? I really liked it. And it's interesting that it's not even about Regal, because I feel like it would be easy to write this as if like, oh, I'm so in love with Regal and I want to make him happy. He doesn't even feel like quite as much of a factor, because you really get the sense that she's sort of putting her baggage on him. He never said anything to her like, oh, I like it when your eyes are like this. Like what I was describing with my boyfriend commenting that he liked my hair better straight. Regal doesn't do that, evidently. It's Nona projecting is what it seems like. So I like that as much as this is something that she's sort of trying to do for a boy, really it's not. Not really. It's for her. And I think that's a really subtle difference that's very important and makes me understand her better. It would be very easy to make Nona like live with these black eyes and not care about how she looks and make it as if like she's sort of above all of that, or considers it like a worthy sacrifice, or any number of ways this could be written would feel like, okay, that's convenient for the sake of the story that she's not hung up on it, but it also makes her feel a little less relatable and like a regular person. And I think including that is pretty smart. I like it. She doesn't have a ton of like weaknesses in that regard. Really, her main weakness that we've seen has been like her temper and her bloodthirstiness. And in this world, that's something that she can lean into fairly often, really, and it winds up being advantageous to her. But this is a much more everyday human sort of weakness. So she is going through the storeroom, and she finally finds the flask, and she pours half of it into a tube to take with her. I thought she was going to take the whole thing, and I was sort of like, they're going to notice that. But no, she's smart. She pours half of it into the tube and is about to put it in like a glass vial. And she hears a key in the lock. And the thing is, because of the groove that she made in the door, in the stone, which I assume she's just going to undo when she leaves. That makes it very clear to anybody who tries to put the lock in that they didn't need to unlock it, that the door was open already. So Nona hides and assumes naturally that it's probably Apple or Kettle coming in. And yet when the door opens, she can still hear Apple and Kettle fucking down the hall. So she's like, okay, now I don't know who this could be. And this person, who we find out later is Joelle, and I pretty much assumed it was Joelle. I knew it wasn't going to be Apple or, like, it just didn't make sense to me that they would come into this room when they had just been having sex, unless maybe, I don't know, maybe they've got some sort of aphrodisiac thing that they'd be after. But I just didn't really see that making sense. And also, if they suspected that she was in there once they, like, put their key in the lock and the door seemed to be open, they would be like, okay, who the fuck's in here? I would think, rather than just, you know, coming in and snooping around. But she winds up finding out that it's Joelle because Joelle is like, I see you, even though she doesn't. She just says it in order to try and get Nona to come out, because she has noticed the vial of eye drops, and that is a giveaway as to who is here. If Nona had just managed to put the drops back before the door opened, likely none of this, like, you know, the ensuing havoc that happens would even have occurred. But Joelle Nona manages to sort of put her off. Joelle tries to be like, oh, I'm not here to hurt you. But then she uses a fucking throwing star. I was just like, girl, were you about to kill Nona in this room? Like, how did you think that was going to go for her? But Nona is aware, like, the fact that Joelle has a key is a pretty fucking big deal. And that indicates that Joelle at least could have an excuse to be here, potentially, which means that if they were discovered, Nona's the one that would really get in trouble, and probably Joelle would be protected somehow. So I guess that Joelle is so confident in that she would be willing to use a fucking throwing star and just let the chips fall where they may, because she just genuinely doesn't think she's going to get in as much trouble as Nona would. And Nona thinks to herself about how, like, she wondered a couple of times whether Joelle was poisoning Abbas Glass when she got sick. And it says she discounted the idea on the basis that Joelle couldn't possibly be so good at the craft that she fooled both Sister Rose and Sister Apple. Which I was like, that's a really good point. Because when she said that, I was like, oh shit, what if she was? But that's a good point. Additionally, continuing to dose the ailing glass despite Kettle watching over her with a single-minded devotion would have been beyond the girl. Of course, Nona hadn't considered that Joelle might have access to the store's cavern and the rows of preparations waiting there. Could she have been tainting the very cures that Apple applied? The thought sent a cold shiver up Nona's spine, rage burning in its wake. Which, possible, but I still think that the earlier point of, like, she would have to fool a lot of people stands. If somebody is applying cures and they're not getting the result they were expecting and they're very experienced, they would have to start to notice that something was wrong with the cures. And I'm just, I don't know. There's no point in continuing to speculate because I won't know. But I just hate Joelle so much that I wouldn't put anything past her. She's just clearly like a despicable person. So Joelle finally, like, decides that she's just going to leave after attempting to gut Nona, basically. And then she opens the door again, and it says, I hope you like your mustard gray. Something hit the ceiling with a soft popping noise. The door shut quickly, and rapid footsteps faded into the distance. So Nona thinks that Joelle just threw gray mustard in here, which is a horrific weapon. And I had a lot of faith that was not what happened, that Nona was being tricked. But then she starts feeling like burning and tingling, and she inhales and feels like the burning in her chest. And I was like, oh shit, maybe she's right. But it just seemed like such an incredibly over the top move to make. I was just not seeing how that could be. And it turns out that it was actually just Pepper. And she is really annoyed at the fact that not only was she fooled, but that she's like sneezing loud enough to draw attention. So a door opens down the hall and she has to fucking flee. And she had been intending to restore the stone around the door to make it like seem that nothing had happened. But when she was trying to escape because she didn't want to open her eyes, she ran into a bunch of stuff in the storeroom and knocked it down. So it's a bad scene inside that storeroom, and there's no hiding. Somebody went in there. So she just decides to scrape up all around the lock and make it look like somebody just used like a chisel or something to get through. So she manages to escape. Like Kettle is after her. But she almost gets smashed to a pancake because it's a very steep drop and she can't use her blades right away because that will leave evidence behind that's very obvious as well. And finally, when she's by herself, she's just sitting there thinking about how Joelle fucked with her that bad and how well it worked. And Nona is so mad, and I don't blame her at all. And not only all that, but she reaches into her pockets and realizes that the vial of eye drops got crushed in the fall. So she didn't even get anything out of this whole fucking ordeal. So then we go to chapter 11, The Escape, which a couple of these chapters I feel like are called The Escape. I don't know how many it turns out to be, but that's how 11 starts. And we are back with Zol and Nona 3 years ago. And they are hiding in like the only house for miles. And when Nona's like, this is a really bad place to hide, they will definitely find us here. Why are we doing this? Zol's like, well, they'll find us wherever we go. There's not a lot of places to hide. Hopefully, if we stay here, only one of them will find us. And I can manage that. And when she said, hopefully only one of us, I thought she meant we can just kill that one. And I was like, aren't they going to notice if whoever goes in doesn't come out again? But what she actually meant was she was going to do her Jedi power and just tell them, oh, you don't see us, which is really fascinating to watch happen when Zol is so like weakened because she's very tired. And this dude pushes it a little bit and just keeps on forcing her to use her ability. And that is part of the plan of the Noi Gwyn. Zol mentions to Nona, they are biding their time. Like the Noi Gwyn know we're dangerous, but they also know we're going to have to expend a bunch of energy in order to keep these assholes at bay. So they're just waiting until we've done that to such a degree that we are totally spent, and then they're going to swoop in. Which, yikes, that makes sense, So we have a conversation between Nona and Zol about the nature of the devils, basically, the impurities of spirit that get cut away. And Nona makes the argument that I would probably make also, which is just you're getting rid of what you're calling impurities, but what I would call personality. Like the flaws that we have are what make us who we are. And cutting those away is eliminating a piece of yourself. And Zol is like, I mean, it is, but that's fine. Because if you want to approach divinity, the closer we get, that makes us more alike. So once you begin to get rid of personality, there's more unity. Which I was like, okay, I guess I see what you mean. It sort of reminds me of Buddhism, where the whole point, the whole like belief system hinges on that nothing really exists, that everything is an illusion, and that the attachment that you have to the way the world is part of the source of your unhappiness. And that seems to be sort of what Zola's saying, but it's also an incredibly, like, if you're coming at it from a perspective that is still very enmeshed in the world, that feels bleak and kind of cold and impersonal. And I understand sort of rejecting that, you know, because I, as many people do, went through a period in my life where I investigated different faiths because I was thinking that maybe there would be something out there that resonated with me. And out of all of them, Buddhism was the main one that I felt like, oh, I see. Okay. And I had a few moments of being like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. But there's not a lot to hold on to, because that's the point of it, is that you're not holding on to anything. The point of it is to be letting go all the time. And it's uncomfortable. And it was something that I just realized wasn't really a sustainable frame of mind for me. It wasn't even something that I wanted to be sustainable. I enjoy life and the world and the illusion, and I don't really want to let go of it. And that's really where Nona's at, where to her, the idea of just like dropping all of these pieces of who we are, it just feels like denying a reality about yourself and treating it as if it's like unworthy, when it's part of what makes you you, and so should be respected. Anyway, so yeah, this guy comes in, Zol does the "you don't see us" thing, and has to do it more than once. And eventually these guys are like, all right, well, we're just going to burn the building down in case they're still in there somewhere and you missed them. Which I was really thinking when they ran outside that these dudes were going to be standing there waiting to see if they were smoked out. But it turns out they really didn't seem to think those two were in there. They just burned the place down to be safe. And after they set the fire, they just left. So when the two girls come out, the place is empty. And they are able to continue on their journey. And they have to head out into the sort of, I want to call it like a wasteland, the black ice. And we find out the black ice is like basically infested with all of the like broken off impurities of people who have used the ship hearts to purify themselves. That's why they are so threatening and hateful feeling. It's basically a kind of like contamination. It's like there's like nuclear fallout or something, but on a sort of spiritual level. And I thought that was really cool. You know, I like that idea a lot. Trying to see where the best spot is because I only have 10 minutes left and I still have to talk about like the main, the big heist, but it's honestly not a hugely long section. Because, so I'm just trying to make sure, this bane has been advancing across their lands for centuries. The Skithral are not a timid people. They were taught to fear it. Let us hope we do not meet that which taught them. And no, as they continue on, Nona really starts to feel like they're being watched, which is making her incredibly uncomfortable. And Nona asks what the black ice is. And Zol's like, well, I'm not allowed to tell you. And she's like, we're about to like be there together. You should tell me. And she explains, the Klalathu, I think is how you would say it, are parts of an individual, not properly alive nor properly dead, and they dwell around the margins of the path. But places such as the temples, in which so many were purged, remain weak spots where Klalathu can leak back into the world. The black ice is where the Klalathu have polluted the ice as it moves across the place where such a temple was sited. The corruption, the evil of an entire race tainting this world again. I think that's dope. I really like it. The best way to avoid the Noi Gwyn is on the backs of the glaciers. They lack purity of heart and are susceptible to the Klalathu. They will not dare to guard this path. And Nona's like, okay, but I'm not a great candidate either, because I'm also susceptible. But Zolitha doesn't seem as worried about that. So, chapter 13, Holy Class. This is when Nona lets everybody know, oh, hey, we're going to steal the book today. The first person she tells is Ara, who at first is like, dude, are you sure about this? And Nona just has to be like, seriously, you need to trust me. And Ara agrees to do that. Jula, not Ruli. Jula is the one in the library that is, that talks to her about the approach of the army. And Nona had no idea how bad it was. She says, what about the 9th and 7th? The Emperor's personal divisions were an elite force with a fearsome reputation. Everyone says Krusakal will deploy them. The 9th went last 7 day. A Dern army showed up at the walls of Arnton. The convent of Silent Patience and the monastery at Red Rill are both in ruins. The 7th are lining up before the Ark, but their numbers are badly depleted. The armies have lost so many message birds, they're using church rooks now, and Darla taught me to read the standard military codes. General Rathan died at the coast last week. This got to me a little bit, I'm not going to lie. Nona had wanted to tell Darla's father that she had brought Joeli Namsis to justice for her death. The general would never hear it now. Perhaps it wouldn't have given him any comfort, but Nona thought Darla would be happier. Darla had never been the forgiving sort. I know exactly what she means in terms of just feeling like you had a sort of personal mental obligation to somebody that you'll never get to fulfill. And that was like something that she was sort of clinging to because we know how much she blames herself for Darla dying. And that was something she had taken responsibility for, was getting Joeli back. And now she can't even like let him know she accomplished that. And that sucks. That just really bummed me out. So we have them all head out together, and Nona, as we find out here, is like half a head higher than Ara even. She's taller than absolutely everybody, which surprises me. And so her, in her habit, she looks like she is the nun leading forth a bunch of novices. And she has enlisted Marcus's help, who is the empath, and he is a key component to this plan because he has to make people agreeable. And they run into Lanotoxis on the way. I really appreciated that Lawrence wrote here, Nona opened her mouth, but her words ran dry. She had last seen the man as he stood and watched her writhe and soil herself in screaming agony on the floor of a Noi Gwyn cell. I like that as much as like Nona has this rage towards this man, that the author really kept in mind the trauma and the fact that when you run up against somebody who has done something like this to you, as much as you want to rage and hold it together and be coldly in the moment, you don't get to choose that necessarily. Your body will have a reaction you don't get to control sometimes. And it does, she can't even speak for a second. And then she kind of realizes when Ara's holding her back that she's taken a step forward without even noticing it. And Lano tells her that he had his friends dig up Saida and make a cup out of her skull. All this shit that he's an evil enough dude that he probably would do some shit like that. I don't know if I believe that he would, but it's obvious he's just trying to get a rise out of Nona, and she's completely falling for it until Ara is like, dude, you're giving him exactly what he's after. And Jula finally steps forward and says, basically, you have to know that I will absolutely, were Nona to do anything, I would absolutely see her prosecuted for it. However, that would not change the fact that you all would absolutely be dead. already, and it wouldn't do you any good. Nona Gray could tear the street open to the bedrock and level the houses all around us. She could blast you with such force that the amulets your gold has purchased would burn and fall to dust, and before I could take a single step to stop her, you would all be smoking awful amid the ruin. I love it so much. I love it. I love it. So they let's see, I'm trying to find the spot where she gives everybody their little job here. She brings in Marcus. Oh, right. Okay, here it is. Ruli, I want you high and watching. There might be a thread work on the vault. We could trigger an alarm. If anyone comes running, do what you can to slow them up with mists and shadows. Ara, you're on diversion. If you have trouble, it could bring soldiers. If that's what happens, they're going to need a better reason to head somewhere else. Perhaps a light and thunder show would do it. Marcus, you're with me. All we need is for everyone we meet to be agreeable. And Jula, you're the brains. I am? A moment of panic threatened from the far side of Jula's serenity. I am. The repetition bore more confidence. So, they head into this, and Nona is very aware that they will be executed if they're caught. This is a serious thing that they are about to do. They are trying to steal from the High Priest's vault. And they encounter opposition very quickly. The first guard that they run into is basically this is after hours, you shouldn't be here. And Marcus is able to easily be no, we're supposed to be here and you're going to let us in. And the guy's all right, I guess you're supposed to be here and I'm going to let you in. But then he brings them to see a priest, I think. Isn't a priest, or because he just calls him Edrin. I don't feel like he gives him a title. And maybe he's a monk. But Edrin essentially has no reaction to Marcus, and it doesn't feel like Edrin is quite aware what Marcus is attempting to do to him. And that was my main concern, was we find out that he has this amulet around his neck that keeps him from being influenced in this way. And despite that, it's not like he can sense, it's not yeah, I have a bulletproof vest on, but I saw you pull out a gun and pull a trigger. I know you're trying to shoot me. It seems like he doesn't realize right away what's going on here. And Nona manages to get the amulet off him and let Marcus, do his thing. This guy brings them to the actual library, and they run into yet another dude. And this guy, he's not wearing an amulet. It's the entire helm that he's wearing is an amulet to protect him. And what it comes down to is Nona basically has to use the boneless potion on both of them, because Marcus isn't really able to do it in time. Once they are brought down with the boneless, he goes up to each of them and tells them that Nona had these beautiful blue eyes in order to try and plant a false memory in their head, which is really kind of great. But it doesn't it just does not go as smoothly as they would have liked. So they get inside. There's so many different sections. I love that Jula basically has Edrin in an arm lock and is screaming at him, asking whether they're basically using the Dewey Decimal System here or not. That is such a hilarious bit of business to me, is her being this really aggressive librarian. And she has to find the book, and they're all wrapped, and she has to make sure to rewrap them so that they don't, if somebody comes in, they don't spot exactly what it is these people were after. It's a tedious business that's taking longer than anybody anticipated. And Nona's starting to get really anxious about it. And then all of a sudden they hear all of these boots outside, and they realize that they've been found out. And Nona says, we've been betrayed. She says, there must have been a lot of them coming, or Ara and Ruli would have delayed them more effectively. So they begin pounding on the door, and Jula still hasn't gotten the book yet. Finally, she finds it. And Nona's looking around for a fucking way out because there's just no way, you know? And finally, she discovers, as she's like sort of feeling through the rocks and the stone, a void beyond that would have, you know, potentially like a catacomb or something, just something that can lead to a way out. And she has to touch the path in order to bust through it. And it's not like it's going to be a secret getaway. They'll know they went this way and pursue them. But at least they're not just going to be sitting ducks in, you know, a dead end here waiting to be gripped up. So she touches the path and manages to bust open this opening. And they escape. They were in a brick-lined tunnel with a low arched ceiling. Rectangular recesses punctuated the walls, places where coffins might have been slid for eternal rest prior to their relocation when the cathedral closed. And Marcus is beginning to panic, and because of his abilities, his panic is sort of rubbing off, and Nona has to like get him calmed down. And just as he's really starting to kind of panic a little bit, she stops and is like, "You need to chill." And then Jula says, "There's a grating here. It's too high to reach, but I can see the stars." And Nona's like, "See, what did I tell you?" She's trying to act like I had total faith we would find a way out, despite the fact that she was definitely fucking panicking. And that is the end of the chapter. So, yeah, that's that. So yeah, I'm very curious how they get out. I assume that they're going to get out. I'm also very curious what happens with her and Zol on the ice, because I feel like there's got to be something crazy that happens here. But I wonder if they'll run into one of those tentacle things. But I'm going to have to wrap. So thank you again, Martin, very much for commissioning this. I really appreciate you. I hope that everybody's listening is enjoying it. And hopefully I will get to see you all soon with a new episode. I haven't checked the dates, but I have faith. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.